Hey, Redeemer family. Thanks so much for being here for the Daily Word. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 20, verses 17 to 34. I got my notes here. I got my Bible here. So we're ready to go. Before we do that, two things. First, click subscribe if you haven't done that already. You just don't want to miss any of the content that we put out here. We do a lot to try to care for you in that way. And then second, this passage that we're going through, I actually did 3 sermons on way back in 2015. So if you want to go more in depth into all of this, just take a look at the show notes at the bottom and you'll see everything that I did back then. The big idea of this section is true greatness. And we start with the first verses, 17 to 19, where we see the great one, where we see the Lord Jesus Christ. And we hear about his great work, where he is going to die and he's going to rise again. And he's predicting that, something that's going to be fulfilled, showing that he is the great prophet prophesied in Deuteronomy 18. He is the one we should all listen to. He speaks the words of God because he is God. And so we see the great one, and then we see great leaders. And great leaders do 2 main things. First, they restrain selfishness. They restrain selfishness. So greatness is never achieved by what you see with James and John here. The first thing you see is self-promotion. You know, they sit there and they say, say that we can sit at your right hand in your kingdom. You know, we want a taste of the glory. And what they're saying there, flattery is never for the person who is being flattered. Flattery is always for the person doing the flattering. And that's what they're doing here. They're trying to promote themselves through flattery. Second, greatness is not achieved by self-promotion. That's what Jesus says, are you able to really drink the cup that you're about to drink, this cup of suffering? And they said, yeah, we can drink the cup. There's this overconfidence, this overestimation of self and their abilities. You find that James actually did drink the cup of suffering. He was martyred. And John went through much of his life, really at the end of his life, being persecuted for Christ. So there's self-promotion, self-importance, and then there's this self-distinction. Notice the 10 there in verse 24. They hear about this and they're indignant. The idea there, because these guys are always fighting about who's the greatest among them, these guys are indignant because they're ticked that James and John got to Jesus first. They want those seats. You know, this is competition. This is an arrogance. I mean, think about it. 2 seats next to Jesus in the kingdom, and it's not going to be Abraham. It's not going to be Moses. It's not going to be Daniel or Job or any of these wonderful Elijah, Elisha, these amazing Old Testament saints. It's going to be these guys. They think that they belong there. There's just a distinction, an arrogance there. They see others as less than because they're the greatest. And finally, greatness is never achieved by being self-serving. This is this idea of lording it over people and ruling down on them, seeing others as existing for your benefit. All of that, none of that achieves true greatness. And Jesus makes that clear there in verse 26. It shall not be so among you. He is adamant that greatness in his kingdom, it is upside down. It's not the top of a pyramid, it's the bottom of a pyramid that's upside down, that you're a servant to everybody. And that's the second idea. True greatness, great leaders are seen in being selfless. That's true greatness. The selfless are ambitious to be at the bottom. That's this idea of servants and slaves. These are not leaders. This servant leadership is like pretty ugly or jumbo shrimp. It is being a servant, serving, putting away all self completely in order to exist for the benefit of others. That's what it means to be truly great in the church, in God's kingdom. Those are not the same. So sorry about that confusion there. But the kingdom and the church are not the same. The kingdom is much bigger than the church. The church is part of the kingdom. So it's not just those that can promote you that you should serve, that can bless you and get you ahead. Jesus is the exact opposite of that. He says, do not emulate kings, do not emulate business leaders and all of that. He said, you emulate slaves. Do that and you're going to be great. Why? Because third, Jesus is the greatest leader of all. Verse 28. Live that way. Live with other people in mind, like slaves and servants do, even as the Son of Man, verse 28, came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Verse 28 is one of the most significant passages in the book of Mark, because in verse 19 we hear that Jesus is going to die. In verse 28, we find out why. But it's said in the context of leadership, that leadership should be selfless. It should be others focused. It should be motivated by love, which love is doing what's best for other people, like ransoming them, rescuing them, buying them out of slavery to sin by Jesus' own death. And then this section ends with Jesus not only being the great leader, he is the greatest leader ever, and all leadership, if it's going to be great, must emulate him. But we see him model that in the last paragraph where he heals the two blind men. He is great, he serves, he loves, and that is the greatness of his leadership. It's seen in the way that he treats these two outcasts. He treats them the exact opposite of everyone else would have. If you were blind in that day, you were born blind because of sin. Either you sinned in the womb or your parents sinned, and that's why you're blind. It is God's judgment. And we see just the opposite of that. We see a God who is compassionate and gracious and even cares for the lowest and the least by caring for these two men. Why? Because he is the greatest of all leaders. And he's the greatest of all leaders because he loves, because he is selfless. And he is the kind of person, he is the kind of leader that all of us should be. We all lead in various capacities, whether we're leading our children at home, whether we're leading at our jobs, or even opportunities to lead in our schools. He is the one, his love, his selfless love for others is what made him the greatest of all leaders, and it's what makes leaders great in the upside down kingdom that he is the leader of. Hope that was helpful. We'll see you next time for the Daily Word.